Hey guys, what's up? Pollock back with another video, and today we're going to go over Shadow Priest performance inside of the Castle Nathria raid. I've done kind of a hodgepodge of raid testing over the past couple months of beta, but just recently they did some Mythic boss testing that I was able to get in on. Got most of the testing done, so there was a single target boss, a couple AoE fights, couple, kind of council fights, so we had a lot of kind of a good way to look at, how Shadow's performing in the raid, what it's good at, what it's strong at. Obviously we didn't really kill the bosses, it was just raid testing, so we're only looking at like a small chunk of the fight, but there are some good things we can talk about as far as how Shadow will probably do in the raid and things like that. So let's get into it. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so first things first, I did stream all this on my Twitch, so if you want to check that out in the link description below, if you want to see the full VOD for the fights. So we tested 3 bosses, so Stone Legion Generals, which is the second to last boss. We tested the Blood Council, which is kind of midway through, and then Sludgefist, which is just a bit after that as well. So both Stone Legion Generals and the Council fight are definitely like, you're kind of like spread target a little bit with ads, all that good stuff. Not a whole lot of stacking going on. And then Sludgefist is your kind of one of the patchwork fights in the raid, not like pure single target, because it is, a decent amount of movement. There is some line of sight in there as well. So there is some stuff you want to play around with that fight, but overall, I think this was a good kind of snapshot into what to expect. There was, obviously there are much more fights in the raid, but these are only the ones we've tested with the kind of most up-to-date recent version of Shadow Priest, so it's a good way to kind of look at what works, what doesn't right now. So just kind of a general note right now, I think there was some awkwardness with this testing, so be a little careful with what you're looking at because, again, not everyone's on like equal playing field damage-wise. So like, for example, some people might have kitted out their characters better with, whatever trinkets were overpowered or whatever soulbinds or, bug conduits and that kind of stuff. So take all these numbers with a kind of like a grain of salt, but, looking at Shadow Priest specifically, I think overall, like, our raid performance is fairly decent. It looks very, very strong overall, especially in those kind of like single target environments as well. Very, very good. AoE is definitely a bit more of a finesse to what we're doing. I think there are definitely some outliers of people that are doing way more like AoE cleave damage than we're doing. I assume they're going to get tuned down a little bit, but even still, we're keeping pace with like the top end of the group for the most part, and looking at other Shadow Priests, that seems pretty consistent as well. So from a range DPS standpoint, we're looking pretty strong right now, actually. And I think most importantly, what makes us so strong, and this was really apparent during the raid testing, is we have options. And I was talking about this a lot during the stream of like, hey, we could swap out this talent or go this talent instead, maybe try this out, or hey, it'd be great if I was this covenant versus that one, right? And I think those conversations are really, really interesting. Unfortunately, what I didn't feel that way too much was about the legendaries themselves. Eternal Call of the Void, Far and Beyond, and Sims is looking like our best legendary from like a overall consistency standpoint. This was kind of hard to test and actually see that in the raid just because, we were only pulling the boss for like minute and a half at most. And it's really hard to get the full gauge of what's valuable on that fight, especially considering on Blood Council and Stone Legion General specifically, there's so many ads that are coming in and out or things that you're kind of distracted with doing that you're actually not mind flaying or mind searing quite that often. And so you're actually not getting as many procs as you would otherwise. Again, especially in the beginning of the fight, and especially when you're in void form, the amount of mind flays you're getting is like arbitrarily lower. So I think that is kind of a weird note. So I do think that'll kind of even itself out after you like fully like finish the fight. We were only doing the beginning. But it was it was sad to see that like we really didn't have another legendary as like a good alternative option. Shadowflame Prism on Stone Legion Generals might see some use depending on where you want to kill the ads, but again, Shadowflame Prism as a legendary is like barely doing any damage, so I doubt that's going to be that big of a deal. And Talbotars is really the other one that you might consider on a single target fight, but even sim-wise, the sims are really saying that like it's still worse than Eternal Call of the Void over the course of a fight. I'm sure it might be better for that first little bit of the opener, but outside of that, like, it's just awkward to use. And, that being said, it might be more consistent, which is nice. But again, the legendaries don't offer quite the choice that I was hoping for a legendary to have in terms of how we're playing. So that's kind of where we're looking right now. I think overall, Eternal Call of the Void definitely feels like the go-to legendary for the raid right now, but things might still change, so keep that in mind. As far as Covenant abilities go, I went with Mind Games and the Venthyr Covenant specifically for all of raid testing. I think mostly because, aesthetically it's the Covenant that I like the most, so just kind of wanted to try it out. It's been a while since I've tested it, especially since they've, semi-recently reworked it with, did more damage, scales with Mastery now. Although that being said, it was super weird to use on fight like Stone Legion Generals, where you have a main boss, a big ad, and then three smaller, or three or four, I think, smaller ads that are spawning. When you have that many targets, Mind Games is not worth casting, so that just kind of made it a little bit awkward. Although some cases, even when you have like 7-8 targets, Mind Games can still be nice in the sense that it can be that priority target damage nuke to help kill that target, which was specifically useful on Council, at least in the order of bosses that we were killing when we were testing. There's an ad that spawns that makes one of the bosses immune, so you really want to nuke that ad down. And Mind Games was great for that, so I tried saving it for that and then doing like a Mind Game Shadow or Death combo to really finish it off, which that felt pretty good. Otherwise, again, it doesn't really scale, so it's kind of disappointing. Unholy Nova just got reworked before we were doing testing, and man, Unholy Nova looks really, really strong. A lot of the testing, it was doing like 9% or 10% of people's damage. Again, keep in mind, this was just like a snapshot of the first like minute of the fight, and that sucker really scales with Bloodlust and Power Infusion, all that haste, but it does kind of even itself out more with Mind Games over the course of a fight. So right now, Unholy Nova is doing so much damage, it's actually break even or even a little bit better than Mind Games, even on single target. So definitely feels like either Unholy Nova needs to get nerfed by like 10-15% to keep it in line, or they just need to buff up Mind Games. So we'll see what happens, but those are basically the only two choices we have right now. Kyrian just feels absolutely horrible to use in terms of Boon of the Ascended. Night Fae Guardians is basically useless. I could see, maybe if they buff Shadow Flame Prism, being a Night Fae might be really nice with Night Fae, Shadow Flame Prism, and going Mindbender for the Stone Legion General fight if you really want to like pad the crap out of the ads, but even then I don't think it's going to be worth it compared to the other options we have. So there we go. Now that being said, Soulbind balance is still out the wall, so we'll see what happens, but that's kind of how the abilities would feel in my opinion over those three bosses. Another quick note I do want to say is that from raid testing, like, Shadow felt really good to play, guys. Like, I was having a lot of fun playing it. I was just kind of goofing around. We had a lot of great options of what to try out. There are even some things that we thought of that I didn't have time to test just because I was so busy focusing on the boss. But I think, having an option of, like, I can take Surrender to Madness, cast while moving, get that priority damage off, or, I can really Hungering Void the crap out of this ad and really nuke it down, or whatever. And I think having those options is just really, really fun, so I thought that was great. That being said, I will say, right now, syncing up Power Infusion and Void Form feels pretty awkward. We didn't really get to that point that much in the fight because, again, you do have to be fighting for a minute and a half or 2 minutes to see that. But overall, I'm not a big fan of that. But there is some testing being done to where we might not quite line up Power Infusion with Void Form as much as we are now, but very much pending Trinket and Soulbind balance. So we'll see what happens, but just wanted to call that out. So that's kind of like my general thoughts over in the raid. Let's kind of take the next couple minutes and kind of quick fire through the three bosses that we tested and my thoughts on them. Okay, so let's talk real quick about the Stone Legion Generals. Overall, this fight seems chaotic as heck, but I mean, we'll see what happens. Our group didn't get super far into the fight, but the first bit is basically you have a boss with a big ad and a lot of small ads kind of scattered throughout. They didn't seem super stacked. If they were, I probably would have tried Shadow Crash, but they were like dashing in between targets and stuff, so I kind of just left my talents with Auspicious Spirits just to get that passive spread damage out. I did find myself doubting them quite a lot. I don't exactly know how much of this was worth it because there is some timing with the ads, and you don't necessarily want to get all of the really small ads down to that 25% threshold at the same time. But for what I was running, I was trying out Misery. I actually swapped to Unfurling Darkness partway through, which felt really, really nice. I don't quite think Death and Madness will make sense just because from an overall fight perspective, it's not really going to help you that much. But depending on that priority damage you need on the ads, it could make sense. Especially considering you really want to nuke the ads once they get to that certain percent. But again, getting that snipe off in raiding is very unreliable, especially when you have like classes like Windwalker Monk or whatever that can just Touch of Death something and then the mob just disappears. So there you go. The one big thing I'd say is that I regret not testing is Surrender to Madness, actually. So part of the big mechanic of this first part of the phase is that when an ad gets like to 20-25% health, until they die, they actually push you back off the platform effectively, which makes it really hard as a caster to hit them because to fight against the knockback, you can't be casting. Well, Surrender to Madness is great for both of these things because you can Surrender to Madness right before the ad dies to get the cast while moving off. and really help finish that ad off. So I think Surrender Madness looks to definitely be like the play for this boss. The one caveat though is that Hungering Void might actually also be great as well, because getting that priority target 10% damage boost on that one target might be really good depending on the strategies used for the boss. So we definitely have some options about, what talents you want to use depending on how you want your damage pattern to come out. So I think overall that was like my biggest takeaway from the fight, which feels pretty nice. Again, we didn't get a lot of value from our legendary here, which I mentioned before, but there you go. I will say Sneering Nightmare didn't really work here. Again, same reason that Shadow Crash didn't work, just because the mobs really didn't spend that much time stacked. So there you go. Moving on to the Blood Council fight. So this one was very interesting. They reworked the fight a little bit compared to what we had last time. So we had some fun doing the dance mechanic in my group. But I think in general, my biggest thing from here is that figuring out when we actually care about getting that Auspicious Spirit's damage increase on those spread targets. Because again, if you intend on keeping your dots on all three targets at the same time, especially at the beginning of that fight when you have all three up, you're going to spend a considerable amount of your time actually dotting those off targets just to get that extra insanity generation. Now, Auspicious Spirits, I mean, getting that guaranteed bump of insanity is going to be really, really nice. So depending on what you're doing, that can give you a lot of, targeted funnel damage of Devouring Plague, into the one boss you're trying to kill. But again, depending on how much time you have to spend actually redotting, that might not fall into exactly a benefit there. So still some testing to be done on that. I think Misery felt great in general just because of the random ad spawns. But, this is kind of going to have the same effect that the Botanist fight had in Mythic Nighthold, where, you start off with 3 targets and slowly dwindle your way down. So the value of Misery will kind of slowly decrease as the fight goes on, where Twisted Fate will actually go up in value. So there could very well be a situation where we only keep Vampiric Touch on the other 2 bosses and don't double dot if you're using Twisted Fate on that. But we'll see what happens. Overall, I mean, I think it was a really fun fight. I liked having Mind Games here to priority target nuke the ad down. So we'll see. I think there's definitely a case to be made. This fight's going to have a lot of pad damage out there, so it's really hard to gauge our damage specifically. But overall, I felt pretty solid in this fight, especially compared to some of the other ranged DPS. And kind of capping off this video with Sludgefist. This was the last boss we tested on Mythic. This is kind of like the pure single target boss. It does have quite a bit of amount of movement. Once you get like the actual mechanic down pat, it becomes a little bit easier. I was definitely fudging this up a little bit when we first started. There's a lot of like, you want to be close to a specific target, but not too close. Sometimes spread stack is kind of the thing. There's also a little bit of line of sight fun. So there is that. I will say there are parts of a rotation this is nice, but I think overall, like, not having to be in void form all the time definitely feels better here. I remember doing this fight before the rework felt absolutely terrible, so I'm definitely loving Shadow. The rework makes this fight so much nicer. I will say you definitely need to be able to plan your movement here and use those free globals wisely. This is one of those fights that's going to be a little awkward on progression, I feel like, because you're definitely kind of hampered by that a little bit in that, there were times where I got linked with a Beast Mastery Hunter or just a Hunter in general, I think. And, as soon as they got a mechanic, they were ready to move instantly. But I was like, hold on, guys. I got to finish my Void Torrent channel. Give me a second. I think that killed me once. So there is going to be a bit of coordination here about, being linked to your partner. Kind of like on the N'Zoth fight when you're linked to someone else, about making sure that you're moving. If you can stutter step, do that. Obviously, having to stop and hardcast movement's not going to be great, but there it is. I will say, because of that, Shadow Crash might be a better play here than Auspicious Spirits. Personally, I don't like Shadow Crash, but I think having that extra global for movement could be helpful. Although, again, you got to make sure that you aim it correctly, because the boss does move around quite a bit. But he does have that little bit of a vulnerability phase, so timing your cooldowns here is going to be very, very important. And I think that's kind of a fun part of this boss. So we'll see what happens. I think that could be an interesting use case to go against the Eternal Call of the Void legendary, because making sure you get that proctor in the vulnerability phase would be awesome, but it's really hard to kind of plan for that. So we'll see what happens. That could make Talbadar's the go-to legendary for this fight, just because of that damage vulnerability phase, and Talbadar's will always give you that consistent value on that damage vuln phase, whereas you may or may not get the Eternal Call of the Void Mind Flay proc, which, again, if you're in Void form, you're Mind Flaying less chance of getting that proc, so we'll see what happens. They're still tuning some stuff, but that's kind of how things look. Okay, guys? Okay, so that is my rant over about the raid testing we did. Hopefully this was valuable to you guys. I think, once we get closer to or if we ever do any more testing, I'll make more of these videos, and then I'll plan to kind of do a boss by boss breakdown once the raid actually comes out and once I get my hands on it after doing my progression on the fight. So look forward to that after the launch of Shadowlands. But again, thank you so much for watching, guys. Big thanks to the Patreons that are supporting me right now. Could make all this content without them. There's a lot of fun videos coming up soon, so hope you guys enjoy that stuff. And we will see you in the next video. And remember, if you do want to see this stuff live, I do try to stream as much of this on Twitch as possible. So give me a follow there if you want to see the next raid testing. All right, guys? Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.